Hi everyone, welcome back to Desert Isle Forge. My name is Tim and this is part 2 of the rotary toaster project. So let's get to work. If you like to purchase this toaster, it is available for sale on my Etsy store. The link will be in the description below. Please check it out. The next component I'm going to make is the third leg of the tripod. I'm using a 1/4 by 1/2 inch flat stock, which is 6 millimeters by 12 millimeters. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a tenon at the end. This will attach this leg to the main tripod body. To make my tenon, first I'm going to forge a shoulder and then use a file to finish everything off. This way I can be more accurate when working small scale like this. I marked 1/2 inch off of the end, that's where my shoulder is going to be, and I marked it with the cold chisel so it doesn't disappear in the heat. So we're going to forge our shoulder first. I'm using this block because it has a nice and sharp corners, and I'm just striking perpendicular with the edge, creating a double shoulder. This is just to make the filing easier, and this way you have to move less material. Now that we created a roughly 1/4 by 1/4 or 6 millimeter by 6 millimeter square block, we are going to let it cool down slowly and go to the vise, and I'm going to use the file to create the tenon. So I'm using a large flat file for this one, and I like to create a square first, a square block. That is the correct width or the size of the actual tenon. And then take off the corners, do an octagon first, and then make it to a round stock. But I'm using the edge of the file that doesn't have any teeth on it to create the shoulders. It's important when you're filing to push and don't pull. So here we are after filing our initial run. We ended up with a 3/16 by 3/16 square section, or 5 millimeter by 5 millimeter. That's about an inch long or 25 millimeter long. Now the next step is to take off the corners, creating an octagon, and then go around and creating the round section. I always like to leave this a little bit oversized, so when you work around it you lose more material and then you don't end up undersized. So here's the tenon after filing it. Next step, I'm going to heat up this area here, and then I use the nail header tool to create a sharper corner, and also I'm going to upset this area a little bit to have a little flared shape. So here we are using the nail header tool, just sharpening up that corner and also creating a little flare. When you do this kind of work, a concentrated heat is very beneficial. So I'm using the torch to heat just exactly where I want it. Especially when you're working small like this, you don't want to bend parts like the tenon part. So very concentrated and precise heat is very important. So here I'm just shaping up the flare a little bit, and then we let it cool down, cut it to the required length, and shape the other end of the little leg. So here's our little leg blank right now. We're going to forge the end flattened out, and then we're going to curve it. This is the distance that I have to have between the ground and the bottom of the tripod. So I marked it on this plate, so I'm gonna bend this piece, and this gives me a reference where I want to be after bending. So let's get to it. So I'm just flattening it, drawing it out, and keeping the width about the same as the rest of the little leg. I'm creating a continuous taper from the top portion. When you forge something small like this, You have to give the heat where you're forging. You cannot heat up the whole thing, because at the beginning of the tenon, this will bend and potentially break. Get a little more. When you're bending anything on the horn, you have to keep it in mind that the horn is tapered, and so that way when you bend something parallel to the horn, it's going to have a little twist in it. So when you do things like that, you have to turn it in an angle, and that way you can keep the bend straight, more or less. So here's the third leg of the tripod. We have a tenon, which is about 3/16 of an inch or 5 millimeter in diameter, and we have a little leg that bent. I'm going to address this with the file and give a little detail to the end. It's going to attach to the main body of the tripod via a riveted tenon, like this. I'm going to drill the hole and then cut the rivet the right length and rivet it. The next pieces I'm going to make are the parts of the bread basket. I drew everything up on this TSD sheet so I can bend the pieces to the correct shape while they're hot. These pieces attach to the tray via riveted tenons. Because I don't have the right material for these parts, I'm going to make my own using a 1/4 by 1/4 solid square, which is 6 millimeters by 6 millimeters, and I'm going to forge them flat. So that's going to be the first step. So after I finished forging the flat stock out of the square stock, I ended up with a material that is about 3/16 of an inch thick and about 3/8 of an inch wide. That's about 5 millimeters by 10 millimeters. I also cut everything to length. I measured the pieces using a soft wire, and here's how I did it. So I cut everything to length and marked everything where the tenon's going to go. I'm going to use the file only to do these tenons because they're very small and thin, and it would be very difficult to forge them. So I'm going to go to the vise and show you a time lapse of that process. So I finished the filing. Now I'm going to use the monkey tool to sharpen the corner and upset this area a little bit. This will help me to cover the holes when I attach it to the piece so the holes don't show through. I'm using the torch and giving just a local heat where I want to work. This way I don't bend it further down, and just using light taps with the hammer and just upset it a little bit and create a sharp corner. Just like so. So all the tenons are finished now. We are ready to bend the pieces. I used filing instead of forging because it's very difficult and challenging to forge in such a small scale. These tenons are about under 3/16 of an inch or 4 millimeter in diameter. So the file was a better option. I can be more accurate and more precise that way. So now I'm going to heat these up and bend to shape using my template that I draw on that stainless steel sheet. So I'm doing the larger arched piece first and using the bending forks to bend it. When you do something like this, you gotta always start at the end and then do the middle of the arch. That's a little bit too much. You can open it up like this. And we'll come back later and maybe adjust it when we drill the holes. You don't really need to heat up, only when you do the ends. It gives you a little bit better malleability. But this is easy to bend cold. And that way actually you have a little bit more control when you're bending cold, because you can touch the material wherever you want. Now that the piece cooled down, we can work on it like this. And this way I have much more control than with the tongue and heat and everything. Trying not to burn myself. And this way also it bends more uniformly. Because the heat sometimes, while the heat is higher, you bend more. This way it's all cold and you can just control everything nicely. So here's the large arch placed on the tray. I'm happy with this shape, and I'm gonna just use this as the template for the second one, and I'll come back and forge the little scroll pieces. Now I'm forging the little scrolls. I'm going to forge a pointed paper, flatten it out, and then scroll it up. I'm done forging all the little spikes. Now I'm going to bend them starting at the tenon end. That way I can grab it a little bit off of the tenon when I'm doing the other point end, so I don't damage it in the process. There you go. I'm gonna flip it over and just make a nice roundish scroll. And now the other end. I'm using a small hammer for this small piece of material, and this way I have maximum control. And just scrolling it up. So I wasn't happy with the shape of the scroll, so I'm readjusting it using this scroll starting hardy. I think I'm gonna just make it a little bit taller and also a little bit tighter at the end. So here are the small parts of the bread basket all forged up. I have to forge two more parts. One is a spacer washer that goes between the trivet and the tray, and the other one is the rivet itself. So here's the little spacer washer. I just cut a piece of 5/8 round stock which is about 40 millimeters, at about 1/2 inch, so 12 millimeters long, and I just heat it up and flattened it. This gives it a little character, and that goes between the tray and the tripod, and it gives us a little clearance to clear all the rivet heads that's going to be underneath and on the tripod itself. So here's the rivet for the pivot point. Since I don't have a rivet tool for this size of a rivet, I use the vise. I clamp the material in the vise and use the nail header tool to create the head of the nail. I left it longer, and I'm going to cut it at the right length at the assembly. So all the parts are forged now, ready for the next step, which will be filing again. I'm going to give details to the parts, clear the surface a little bit, and then I'm going to put them back in the forge to get rid of all the file marks. I'm not going to talk during this process because it will take a while, so I'm just going to record everything and cut it together. So I'm done with the details. I added some features to the tray, to the handle, and clean the surfaces, took up the edges. Next step I'm going to do is drill the holes and get ready for riveting. I decided not to drill the hole in the end of the envelope, but rather going to punch it. Turn. Turn. So here are all the parts pretty much finished, all the holes drilled, everything filed, and I pre-assembled it just to see everything fits. Next step is to heat it up and get rid of the file marks and clean the surface with the wire brush. So I'm going to do that, and then the final assembly. Alright, finally we are at the assembly stage. I cut all the tenons at the right length, ready for riveting. I also did a little countersink on each hole to accept a little bit more material, and I don't have to have that large of a rivet head. So I'm going to use my small acetylene torch and a very light hammer, and I'm going to rivet these tenons and assemble the whole piece. So here's the bread basket all assembled. I cleaned the underside with the wire brush to remove all the heat marks, also around the top. That's important because after it's going to be difficult to do so. And here's the tripod all ready to assemble. Now we're going to do the final assembly, putting the pivot rivet in there. I'm using this blocking device and placing the basket on the top. And I'm gonna just heat the very top of end of the rivet and just mushroom it out because I want this rivet to be loose. So we're just gonna give a small heat on the top and do it with light hammer strike and just mushroom it out to create to trap the rivet there. So I'm heating from the top, just giving a small heat to the end so I can mushroom it out and leave the rivet loose. I don't want the rivet to fill out the hole and be tight. So it's going around, and I'm probably going to reheat it again for the next one. It's still loose. I need a little more. Alright, started to snug up a little bit, so I'm gonna call it done. It's a little bit snug, but I can loosen it up by tapping on the rivet without placing it on the end. So to loosen up a snug rivet, you just place it over the hardy hole and just give it a little tap from the top. This will loosen it up a little bit. So now it spins freely. And next step, we're gonna clean up the heat marks on here and then the rivet and give it a light coat of olive oil because I want to be this piece to be functional and you can be able to use it in the fire at the hearth. So I'm just using a brush and a white cotton rag to dab oil all over the surface, and then I'm gonna wipe it off until it feels clean, doesn't feel like oily and drippy. And that's about it. And you can, if you use this item and or store it for a longer time, you can also give an extra coat of oil, or I would regularly apply oil on it just to keep it in good shape and prevent it from rusting. And all over the handle and everywhere. Also makes it smell good. And as I said, you want to use a food grade finish on these items so you don't get any nasty stuff in your bread or on your bread when you're using this. If you just want to use it for decoration, you can spray it. Also, if you like to make it more old looking or like antique, you can clean it up nicely with the wire brush and just use a salt and vinegar solution, brine, and brush it on the surface. Leave it on for a couple weeks. Maybe repeat the brushing, the addition of vinegar, salt on it a couple times, and then after that you just use a hand wire brush to clean up the surface, and then you have an old looking, a vintage looking rusty item. but I like it to look new right now. And it feels good, dry, doesn't feel tacky. That's why I want to be. And it might smells a little bit in the first time when you use it, but that will go away. So this is the end of the toaster project. I hope you liked it and learned something interesting today. If you'd like to support my channel, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye. Alright guys, so let's try this out. Since I don't have a fireplace, I'm going to use my forge and toast up some bread.